Greetings, everybody. This is Stacy, and I am very excited today to bring you this training. We're going to discuss teacher, staff, and wellness in a stressful world, resiliency strategies that contribute to the health of classrooms. This is a training that I have been providing throughout this last summer into the school year for hundreds of teachers. And I have just had this opportunity over the last couple of years to really be thinking about teacher wellness. And so we're going to dig into that today. So for about the next 50 minutes or so, just kick back, relax. If you have a pen and a paper so that you can take notes, we're going to do a lot of reflection today. Or if you want to type on your computer while you listen to this, then you'll probably get a little bit more out of it. So I want to introduce myself, tell you a little bit about who I am. My name is Stacy York Nation. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I have been in private practice now for about 20 years, and I have been working with kids and families for that long. And so I have this deep passion in helping teachers understand some of the mental health components that happen with children. I have a background in trauma-informed practices, and I've spent about the last 10 years training teachers, educators, paraprofessionals, staff who work in the education system, and administrators on trauma-informed practices. What I've done for the last couple years through the pandemic is also been providing a support group for teachers, one for specific for teachers and counselors, and another one specific for administrators. And I've learned just so much about that. And I've been listening to a lot of the stressors that are happening in school systems. And so this particular session today that we're going to be discussing is really about wellness, and it's based in what I've been learning over the last couple years. I've taken the information that I have from learning through about trauma-informed practices, and I've applied it to how to help teachers with their wellness. And so I want you to kick back and relax. Like I said, I hope you have pen and paper or notes on your computer where you can really dig into some of the questions we're going to talk about. One of the things that I've been hearing for the last couple of years from educators specifically is really there have been a lot of self-care conversations and a lot of self-care talk. And most teachers are like, we're sort of over that discussion. We're really over the idea of self-care. We're really over, talking about self-care because we're so overwhelmed that we can't even really focus on ourselves. So what we're going to do today is we're really going to dig into what that means for you as educators and staff members working in that education system. How do we look at wellness from a holistic perspective, really understanding your jobs, right? That's the biggest thing. So what I hope you gain from today, we're going to learn a little bit about our own brain development. We're actually going to look at how you're wired. We're going to look at what happened to you in your own development, in your own childhood, how you got to be wired the way you are. We're going to reflect on some key events that impact your wellness. And we're going to create an individual daily wellness plan. So by the time we're done today, we should have come together and you're going to have a strong plan for something you're going to do every day that contributes to your own wellness. And then we're going to talk about how this applies to your classroom or where you're working within the school district. So just sit back, let's get started. So first of all, we want to talk about stress. So in order to talk about wellness and how to add a daily wellness plan, we have to talk about unwellness. We have to talk about stress. And most of us have grown up in a time where we haven't really discussed stress. We haven't really talked about what causes stress, how do we deal with stress, but we're living in a very stressful time. And if you've been teaching over the last 3 years, or you've been in the education system the last 3 years, you are very well aware that being in an education system has become more stressful. So the way I talk about stress with kids, with families, with my own family, also I'm in the Army part-time, so I talk about this with my soldiers. What we talk about is that your stress system is like a rubber band. The more you're stressed, the more you're stretched. And the more stressed you are, the more stretched you get. If you never do anything to release the stretch, what happens is you get so stressed that you snap. And that snapping looks like a lot of things. The snapping can impact your physical health, it can impact your emotional health, it can impact your mental health, it impacts your relationships. So we see that through behavior in students all the time. But what we don't do is think about that with our own selves. So what I want you to do is really start thinking about, what do you have on your plate that's stressful? What do you have on your plate that's really stretching you? And what are we doing to release that stress? So for me, I'm a divorced mom of 2 teenagers. They just started high school. Just the transition into that stage of parenting becomes a stretch, right? I'm transitioning into being a mom of high school kids. That is a stretch. I'm a mom. That's a stretch. I do public speaking. That's a stretch. I travel for my job. That's a stretch, right? So I want you to really start thinking through, what is your stretch? And in some ways, right, there are going to be days that are more of a stretch than others. So I believe, especially in the education system, August to September is a huge stretch. Everyone's transitioning from summer into the school year. It takes about 3 to 4 weeks to really feel settled into that school year, and then if you have stuff going on in your personal life, you're going to be stretched. Maybe your physical health is a struggle. Maybe you've had a loss of a family member. Maybe you are going through a different stage in your own parenting. Maybe you're thinking about retirement. Whatever it is that's going on with you, that is a stretch. So we want to really think about what is stretching us, what is releasing that stress. What is stretching us? What is releasing that stress? So that's what we're going to spend the bulk of our time today, is really talking about our own stress response systems and how they were wired. So in order to do that, we've got to do a little reflection. So we have to talk about how you got to where you are today. Let's chat about that. So I want you to do a little bit of reflection, thinking about, what are some events that occurred in your past? We know that the brain is fully organized between 0 and 5 years old. So the foundation of your brain is really organized prior to 5 years old. We know that the brain is fully developed around 25 years old. So I really want you to think about 0 to 18, 0 to 25. What was happening in your life? What was going on? I share often that I grew up in a pretty chaotic home. I'm the daughter of an alcoholic. There was a lot of adverse events that occurred in my life from 0 to 18. So I have some pretty defining moments that impact my stress response system. That is a critical piece of how I handle myself as an adult. It's really important for me to unpack some of that in my adulthood so that I understand why I respond the way I do, why I'm wired the way I am. So be thinking about your 0 to 18, right? Jot a couple words down, think a little bit about what was going on for you. And as you're doing that, I also want you to be thinking about what is currently happening in your life. Are you working in a job you enjoy? Are you in a school that you want to be in? Are you supported by your administration? Are you working in an environment that is stressful? Are you doing things in your personal life that are fun, that add value to your life? Do you have meaningful relationships? Are you supported by some of your friendships? I want you to think about what is currently happening in your life, okay? And then I really want you to think about, how do you want to show up this school year? What is it that you want to provide in your classroom? How do you want to enter every day? One of the things that happens when we're most stressed is that we're really in survival mode. And it's pretty hard to think about intention and think about how we want our day to begin, how we want to start our day, how we want to greet our students when we're just in that survival mode, when we're so stretched. So if you're taking the time to watch this today, I want you to take the time to really think about, maybe even jot down a little bit about these answers. So I'm going to give you a couple minutes. We're going to just sit in silence. I want you to really think through, what are your intentions of how you want to show up this school year. Do you want to be more consistent? Do you want to be friendly when you wake up in the morning? Would you want to greet every student? Yeah, just take some time. All right, now that you've taken a few minutes to just write down some thoughts, we're going to talk a little bit about adverse childhood experiences. So many of you have had that training, the ACEs training. Adverse childhood experiences are really things that have occurred to us 0 to 18. They're pretty critical events. So if you have not had the opportunity to really do your ACEs survey, talk through your childhood events, it's important to see if you've been impacted by any of the things on this list. So it's 10 questions, 0 to 10, you get a point for each thing you say yes to. The higher your score, the more adverse childhood experiences you experience that directly impact your stress response system. It directly impacts your fight, flight, freeze, fawn response. So it's really important to know that about yourself, because if you have a higher ACE score, you may have a quicker stress response system. You may get activated quicker. You may have kids that trigger you a little bit more. Or you may have specific type of students that trigger you. So the reason we talk about this is because the flip side of the ACE score is the resiliency score. So you can go to ACES Too High, ACESTOOHIGH, and you can look at the survey. You can also look at your resiliency score. So I am an ACEs score of 7. So statistically, I shouldn't even be presenting or talking to you. The reason I'm here today is because I had a really high resiliency factor. Number one resiliency factor for all students is relationship. If you have one person in your life that cares about you as a student and helps mitigate some of those adverse childhood experiences, you have more likelihood that you will be healthier as an adult. So resiliency factors are extremely important. I'm a divorced mom. I gave my kids a 1 on ACEs. I can offset that with resiliency factors. So it's important to know this because this impacts how you're wired. If you receive or if you experienced some of these adverse childhood experiences pre-verbally, prior to the age of 3 or 4, that's going to impact your stress response system directly. If you experienced them during your toddler life or during early childhood time, it's going to impact how you respond to people. So if you experience these during your teenage life, depending on where you experience these events in your development, it directly impacts your stress response system. So I'd just like to acknowledge that as we go through this. Now we want to shift gears a little bit. Okay, we've got you thinking about your development. I've got you thinking about how you were impacted during your development, and I've got you thinking about who and how you want to show up. Now I want you to really spend a few minutes just thinking about your why. Why are you teaching? Why are you in the education system? Why are you showing up as a paraprofessional or support staff or secretary or bus driver? Why are you in this system? Why do you keep showing up? And why did you choose this as a profession to begin with? So I want you to take a couple minutes and I just want you to write a few things down. Maybe you did this because it's the family business. Everybody in your life is teaching. Maybe you did this because you always wanted to work with students and children. Maybe you did this because you had a really great teacher who inspired you and you wanted to be like that person. Maybe you did this because you had a really terrible teacher and you didn't want students to have to experience that. So take a minute or two and just write down your why. You're watching this online, you can also comment, drop a comment below. The more people that comment about their why, it gets really interesting and you can read through people's comments. If we were doing this as a live session, I would ask you to type it in the chat box. It's really interesting to read the why. Why are people, maybe you're just doing this for a paycheck. I don't know very many teachers or people in the profession who stay for the paycheck. They really stay for the students, right? So I always say this is an extremely taxing profession for a very low rate of pay. But we all need a paycheck, right? It's important to have that to pay our bills. So that's also a realistic answer. So why did you choose this profession? All right, give me a few seconds, a minute or so to really think about that. And that leads us to our next question. I want you to look at these questions and I want you just to notice, who's your favorite teacher? Think back to your very favorite teacher. Who was your favorite teacher and why? This is also a great one to comment on as you're watching this, because it's really fun to see why people chose their favorite teacher. Think about that. Was your second grade teacher, your fifth grade teacher? Mine is a high school teacher. My favorite teacher was my advanced chemistry teacher in high school. He had very high standards and he always pushed us really high. He also had this like red pen and he would mark our answers wrong. And initially I was a little offended by that. And then he'd give our papers back and he'd say, work together to figure the answers out. Use your team to figure the answers out. And I loved that. I loved that strategy. So he believed in us, which was really important. In the same breath, I want you to think about your least favorite teacher. Who is the worst teacher you had? Mine was a middle school teacher that inappropriately looked at all of the girls in the class. He always had inappropriate comments, and I lived in a time where we didn't address that in the way that we would today, and none of us enjoyed that class. So that made for a creepy experience in middle school, for sure. So who's your worst teacher? Favorite teacher, worst teacher. Which one are you? This is a really important question. So I don't believe that you have to be the favorite teacher for all kids. That's not possible. However, I do believe that you can actively make a decision not to be the worst teacher for any student. Think about that, whatever your role is in the environment of education. Students need warm, loving, caring adults. That does not mean you have to be all warm and squishy and not have standards. It doesn't mean that you have to just roll over and let kids do whatever they want. It means that you show up consistently, you show up fun, you show up in a way that kids can really connect to. My guess is whoever your favorite teacher was, whoever your worst teacher is, the reason they fall in those two categories is because of how they made you feel. I have asked this question to over 1,000 people in the last month, and very few answers are related to what was being taught or the content. It was very much connected to how they made you feel. And oftentimes it wasn't just a teacher. It may have been a counselor. It may have been a paraprofessional. It may have been the secretary. It may have been the bus driver. So when you think about, it could have been any number of people. I had one people tell me about the custodian that was their favorite person in their high school. because that custodian gave this kid a safe space to eat during lunch, a safe break away from where they needed to be or were supposed to be. It's extremely important that we recognize how we got wired. Every person who works in education across the board comes through the door of a school with our own educational experience. Whether we went to college or not is not what I'm talking about. We come through the door with years of how we were treated in education. If I could tell you the number of adults who land on my couch in my private practice talking about the trauma they experienced in a school setting, you'd be blown away. As you are navigating this discussion today around wellness, it's important for us to remember our own experiences with education. We are creating memories for the students in our classrooms. So while you, as a professional in the education system, whatever your role is, you may have hundreds of students throughout your profession. As a student, you only have 12 to 20 teachers, maybe 30 in a lifetime of your education from kindergarten through 12th grade. You're going to have a lot fewer. You're going to have much more memory that's a lot clearer about who is impacting your life. So as adults, it's so important that we remember that. We remember that we're creating memories for these kids that we get the privilege of interacting with and influencing and impacting on a daily basis. So while you may not be the favorite teacher of all students, I want you to avoid being the worst teacher for any student. That is such a critical piece. The other thing that happens is the worst teacher isn't actually teaching. Those students are not remembering any academics, because if you don't feel safe and you don't feel connected, you actually can't reach up into your cortex to learn. Your stress system is so activated that you go into survival mode as a student, and you're not going to be able to grasp the academic components. So think about that piece as you look at, how am I going to show up for these students this year? Okay. All right. Let's talk about how you're wired. So I always say, I can walk through across the threshold of any room in whatever role that I am in, and all of the little Stacys come with me. I don't leave middle school Stacy behind. I don't leave high school Stacy behind. I don't leave toddler Stacy behind. Every piece of who I am and what I've experienced walks across a threshold with me. So blueprints are the way that we're wired, right? It's the physiology in how we're wired. A blueprint is really how our brain is wired, how we're connected, and we can't fight physiology. So it's extremely important, as we talk about wellness, to really sink into the foundation of our own brain development. What was happening to you in your development? So in order to do that, we have to understand a little bit about the brain. Okay. So for those of you who've heard me speak before, you know that I'm certified in Dr. Bruce Perry's neurosequential model of therapeutics, the NMT, through the Child Trauma Academy. Been certified in that since started working with them in 2010. So my brain is wired at this point to think about brain development in this way. If you haven't heard of Dr. Perry, his resources are fabulous. He wrote a great book called The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog. If you're working in any trauma-informed situation, that is an important book. Most recently, he wrote a book with a woman named Oprah. Not sure if any of you have heard of her. And the book is called What Happened to You. It's such an important book. And we talk a lot about brain development. So I want you to pause. You're thinking about yourself for a minute. I just want you to sink into this slide, okay? So what we know is the brain develops from the bottom up, from the inside out. The bottom part of that brain to develop is the brainstem. The brainstem is fully developed in utero to 9 months old. That's why that in utero experience is so important for infants. And it houses your sensory system and your fight, flight, freeze fawn response. So those are housed in the same place, which is a really important part of understanding brain development, okay, and child development. Your sensory system, your fight, flight, freeze response system, okay? Next part of your brain to develop is that midbrain or the diencephalon, and it develops about 4 to 6 years old. It's responsible for emotional regulation. This is why we start kids in kindergarten around 5 or 6 years old, because this part of their brain is a little bit more on board. It's more developed. They have a better time at maybe stating, I feel sad, mad, glad, scared. They're able to sit and focus a little bit longer. They're able to follow directions from other people a little bit longer. Most kids are able to function in a little bit longer or an area with more people in it. The next part of the brain to develop, that green box, is your limbic system. It's responsible for your social relationships and understanding social skills. How many of you have ever walked into a room and you're like, ooh, something's going on in this room? That's you being able to read that room, right? This is where kids struggle with recess. This is where teenagers don't want to give up their phone, because it's really early childhood to teenage years that we're really looking at that piece of development. And the last part of the brain to develop is the cortex. And the cortex is fully developed around 25 years old, depending on how much trauma you received during development. And I call it your worst enemy, okay? The cortex is responsible for critical thinking, problem solving, and decision making. It's really responsible for helping us understand why we do what we do. I call it your worst enemy because you have one and they don't. Students don't have a cortex fully developed, and yet we cortex them all the time. So we say things like, why did you do that? And they say, I don't know. And we say, of course, you know, you've done this a million times. And they say, no, I really don't know. Cortex, we utilize ours all the time because it helps us problem solve, critically think, engage in decision making, right? It helps us understand the why behind what we're doing, the why behind who we're interacting with. But kids don't have a fully developed cortex. So it's extremely important to remember that as we go through the brain development. So when I'm thinking about how are you wired, I want you to sink into what has happened in your development in those bottom parts of the brain, especially the parts in that pink box and that yellow box. What was going on in your life from 0 to 6 years old? What are the stories that have been told to you? Did you have any medical trauma? Did you move? Did you experience any deployments? Did you experience any divorce? Was there any child abuse or neglect? Was there any sexual abuse? All of that is an extremely important part of how your brain is wired. The other piece of that is, what was going on in your home? What were your parents teaching you about emotional development? So I'm a child of the 80s, and in the 80s, you know, kids were to be seen and not heard. Do not talk back to adults. No disrespecting your elder. And I'm not sure that serves me well as an adult. So my guess is many of you are experiencing some of those same messages that you received about expressing feelings and emotions, right? When you grow up in a time like that, you learn early on, your emotions are too big, so don't express them. If you do express them or you're having a disagreement, you're going to get a spanking. You're going to, you know, be told what's going on. Like, there was no processing of why we felt the way we felt. So I can't walk across the threshold to work with children without knowing that piece about myself, because that may mean I have some pretty important messages that were sent to me over my lifetime that I need to work through and I need to understand about brain development. So I want you to think about, what kind of home did you grow up in? What did you learn? Did you come from a family where if someone was angry, they were yelling, and maybe another person was angry and they were silent? Someone is happy and they're yelling. Someone is happy and they're silent. I always say it's really interesting when kids learn to walk, because they put one foot in front of the other. And they learn as they look in the world that everyone that's walking is putting one foot in front of the other. But when they're learning about emotional development and they're learning about how to express their feelings, not everyone is doing it the same way. They may learn at home that when mom is angry, she yells. When dad is angry, she's silent. When teacher is angry at school, you get sent to the principal's office. There's a lot of messaging that kids experience. Because they don't have that fully developed cortex, they can't process all of that in the way that we do now as adults. So I want you to just spend some time thinking about your own growing up experience. What were the messages you received? Okay, just take a few minutes, jot down some of those ideas about your own brain development from the bottom up, from the inside out. Good. What I want you to remember is if you grew up in a place where your fight, flight, freeze, fawn situation was activated, you were stretched because of a stressful situation, and you didn't have an adult that helped you release some of that stretch, your physiology is just stretched. Okay. And that means that you have a higher heart rate or a lower heart rate. We saw this at critical times in the pandemic, right? When we didn't know in education if we were going to be remote, fully remote. Are we going in person? Are we going remote again? Okay, we're back in person. Okay, oh my gosh, we had a huge, a big group came up positive. We got to go remote again. So what happens is we just stay in this stretched state of I am stressed because the predictability is not helpful. I do not know what is happening next. We experience something overwhelming. So let's just talk a little bit about fight, flight, freeze. So fight, flight, freeze, fawn, or flock. You'll hear that one too. Fight, we know that, right? Fight is about like, I feel like I want to fight. I want to get activated. My stress response is telling me I got to win and I got to go for it, right? I got to engage and I am not backing down. Okay, that is the aggressive or assertive. Some of us are more fighters and some of us are more flighters, right? It's important to know what you are. So flight is fleeing, right? Our natural response is like, I got to get out of here. Get me out of the situation. It's dangerous. This person's engaging with me. I don't feel safe. I need to get out. There's fight and there's flight. The other one is freeze. Freeze response is like check out, body starts to shut down. I don't feel safe, but my body's going to keep me alive. I'm going to be frozen. Okay. And then fawn is I need approval. I need someone to constantly being approving of what is going on in my life. So I was a fawner, straight A student, really tried hard not to make any mistakes, extremely scared to make any mistakes because I needed that approval and I needed perfection. So I want you to look at your own response system. Fight, flight, freeze, fawn. What is your natural stress response reaction? Okay. We have lots of different people in our lives that have different reactions. I'm also a flighter. I worked in a school setting for a long time in school-based mental health. I had a kid that we were restraining on a pretty regular basis back when restraints were more common. Believe me, I know a lot differently now. And I wish I would have known now. Know then what I know now, because I would have done things a lot differently. Well, one day we were restraining this kid. We've been restraining him pretty regularly for 6 to 7, sometimes 8 hours a day, which is pretty much the whole school day. We got done with this restraint. We thought he was calm. Everything was going well. The kid gets up and he gives me a titty twister. Grabbed my nipple, twisted as hard as he could. I grabbed his hands. I had an immediate reaction. Thank goodness I was a flighter because I said, don't ever touch me again. And I left. If this kid had done that to the person I worked with, that person's a fighter, I think the kid probably would have gotten knocked out. So know that it's good to know how we respond. Okay. The other thing we should be looking at is our own internal physiology. Heart rate tells us a lot about our stress response system. When we are in fight mode or flight mode or fawn mode, sometimes we have a higher heart rate. Or in freeze mode, we have a lower heart rate. Normal heart rate we shoot for resting heart rate is about 60 to 80 beats per minute. You should know what your heart rate is. You should be tracking your resting heart rate. Calmest heart rate in the room can calm other heart rates. If you're working with students, you're going to have students in your classroom that are really activated. There are students in your classroom who are going to be at 120 or 130 as a resting heart rate. There are students in your classroom who are going to be under 60. They're going to be 40 or 50. They're going to be a freeze response sort of heart rate. So when you know what you are, you can actively manage your own heart rate so as not to match their heart rate. That's a really important piece. I run about 55 to 65, depending on the season of my life, depending on what I need to go through. When I was going through my divorce, my resting heart rate was about 65 to 75, much more activated actually, because I was under a bigger stress state. Then we want to talk about what do you do to lower your stress, right? So we're talking about wellness, and I'm very aware we're running closer on time. So just hang in with me. We have about 15 more minutes. As we talk about wellness, we want to look at kids who trigger us, right? So when you have a student who's triggering you, I want to talk about 3 questions to ask yourself. First of all, we get triggered when our basic needs are not met. So remember, brain develops from the bottom up, and the bottom part of our brain is our sensory system and our fight, flight, freeze, fawn. They live in the same part of the brain. So if your basic needs are not met, if you have not eaten, if you have not rested, if you are thirsty, you are going to be generally triggered at times. You're going to be a little more hangry than other times. If you have a kid that's triggering you over and over and over, it's the same kid, I want you to be asking yourself these 3 questions. First of all, who does the student remind me of from my past? There are students that we work with who remind us of a bully that we had when we were students ourselves. There might have been a bully that was bullying us. They may remind us of a person in our life that was mean to us or took away our power, made us feel less in control. Okay. When did we have this feeling before? This is a really important question. So many of you have been to a wake or a funeral or celebration of life. Most of us have an experience when we go to those things of when have I felt this way before? What other funerals have I been to? What happens is you're opening up the drawer of grief and loss, and you're thinking of all the times you've ever felt grief and loss. A student can open that same drawer for us with a different feeling. It might be a feeling of powerlessness. It might be a feeling of embarrassment, right? Kids can hijack our classroom. They might hijack us, and take over or take control. When have I lost control? When have I felt, you have to identify the feeling, see when you have felt that feeling at other times in your life. And then what age did you experience those hard things in your childhood? I had a lot of hard stuff happen to me at the age of 8 and the age of 15, 16. So 8-year-olds used to be really hard for me to work with. 15, 16-year-olds really were hard for me to work with. I had to look at my own past to see what I needed to work through so that I could work with that age of kids. Okay. All right. So let's talk about wellness. I know I skipped a couple slides. That's okay. Don't stress about that. If we have time, we'll come back to them. I want you to think about your wellness plan, because in your wellness plan, it's extremely important to understand how you're wired. So when I've had to do all this reflection today, and the purpose of all that reflection is understanding your own blueprints, understanding the way your brain works, understanding your own experiences so that we can get to this part, which is wellness. Okay. Once we understand our own wellness, our own wiring, we can develop a plan to cope with triggers and to cope with our own stress. All right. Our brain develops from the bottom up. The key to our emotional regulation is in our sensory system. So one of the things that's happened in the last couple of years is districts are offering sort of self-care classes. They might say, hey, we're offering a yoga class for everyone in the district. And some people are like, a yoga class is not going to fix my stress. Some people might really buy into that. The key to understanding our wellness is, what did we do as kids that brought us joy and calmness? What did we do that created a space where we felt joy and calm? For me, it was reading. I read voraciously as a kid. I read so much that I would get my light bulbs taken away, my flashlights taken away, grounded from books because I was avoiding everything else. That was an escape for me. What I realized as an adult is that I need to be reading pretty regularly for me to feel less stressed, and not reading for work. It's got to be fiction. It's got to be fun. It's got to be something I enjoy reading. It's got to be, let me escape a little bit. So I have to build that into my day. I can build in drinking water. I can build in exercise. I can build in the things I know that are good for my physical health. But when I release my stress through the ways I was wired as a kid, I feel better. I did not grow up in a family that did a lot of fitness. So fitness is a job for me. It doesn't bring me joy. I know I need it from a cortex level, but it doesn't bring me joy in the same way that reading does. So the key to your stress response system and your regulation, we say emotional regulation is our ability for our rubber band to be less. That is really connected to the bottom part of your brain. Regulate, relate, reason. In order for us to regulate, we have to look at our sensory system. Did you ride horses? Did you have pets? Were you creating? Many of us in our growing up life were doing different activities. We're dancing, we're listening to music, we're playing in band, we're doing sports. If you're not doing those same things as an adult, you're not releasing your stress in the same way. So when you're looking at a key piece of your wellness plan, I want you to look at, are you meeting your basic needs? Are you getting enough sleep? Are you drinking water throughout the day? Are you going to the bathroom? Many of the educators and the people I work with in the education system do not even take a bathroom break. So that's an important piece of this conversation is, am I getting my basic needs met throughout the day? Am I moving my own body? Have I built in going outside, looking at the sunshine? What is happening to my sensory system? And I want you to think a little bit more in depth about your own sensory system. So we know sensory system, our hearing, seeing, smelling, tasting, and touching, right? Those are the 5 main senses. And then we have these 3 other senses: interoception, proprioception, vestibular. Okay. Some of you right now have been doodling this entire time. Some of you are listening to sounds that are happening around you. Some of you have been fidgeting or moving in some sort of pattern repetitive activity. You've been shaking a leg. You've been spinning in a chair. You've been rocking back and forth. You've been getting up and walking and listening. You are engaging your sensory system in a way that makes the most sense. Some of you have been snacking while we're eating. Some of you are drinking water. Some of you are like, oh my gosh, Stacy, I hate your lighting. I don't like your slides. All fine. That is engaging your sensory system in a very different way. So it's important to think about your sensory system. The other thing we talk about when it comes to triggers and wellness is there are kids in your classroom who have a different sensory system than you do, and you are more activated by them and they are more activated by you. We're going to talk more about that in the other piece that I'm doing for you guys for some continuing education. So when it comes to emotional regulation, but I want you to think about your own sensory system. I dress in layers when I go to listen to people for continuing ed, because I have no idea what the temperature is going to be. And if I'm cold, I can't learn. I am a kind of person that when I'm speaking, if you're in my audience, you can get up and walk around. I'm not going to be activated by that. But as soon as you start clicking that pen, I am losing my mind. I have no idea what you're even saying. So I want you to think about your own sensory system as you create your daily wellness plan. I know in this season of my life, where I'm a little more activated because I am now parenting at a different level than I was before, in a different way than I was before. I need to be reading more often. I am a better person when I am reading because my stress response system is released. So I need to build that into my day. I need to get up earlier and I need to read a little bit before everybody wakes up. I need to read before I go to bed at night so that I can release that. I need to be drinking water. That's an important part of my stress response system. So I really want you to sink into what is good for you in a daily wellness plan. Okay. When you're thinking about sensory system, think about the things you have in your life that release stress. Most of you have a picture of someone you love on your phone. Okay. Why do you have that? Because when you look at them, you get a little love hit and you feel better, right? Do our kids have some of the same things? All the things we're talking about today apply to students. How do you release the stress of work as you transition home? Do you listen to music? Do you listen to the radio? Do you need to be in silence? Do you need to create space where you're alone? That's okay too. When you give yourself to other people throughout the day, you need to have moments where you really are alone for your sensory system and your stress response system to release and reset. Okay. So I want you to think about that. What are your biggest takeaways? All right. Our time is almost up. I want to know, what are your biggest takeaways today? I want you to write down 3 things that you're going to take into the school year with you. And I want you to share what is your daily plan for wellness. We covered a lot of information today. We talked about who are you? How did you get where you are today? We talked about what are some key events that occurred in your life? What was going on in your development? We talked about how are you wired? Brain develops from the bottom up, the inside out. What was going on for you in your life during key developmental stages? How is your sensory system wired? There are days when I have had more talking and put out more words than I really want to, and I need time to just be quiet, right? I live with someone who really enjoys lifting heavy things and putting them down. And when he gets crabby, I say, you should probably go lift heavy things and put them down in the gym, right? He's been doing that since he was a teenager. It's part of how he's wired. I'm looking at my own 2 teenagers and I'm thinking about how they're wired. I have a son who's a runner. He is less stressed when he's running. I have a daughter who's a creator. When she's most stressed, she's painting and she's drawing, she's building friendship bracelets, she's creating. We are wired through our sensory system. And in order for us to really create a daily wellness plan that makes sense to us, we need to make sure our basic needs are met every day, and we need to put something in place from our own wiring when we were a child, when we were a teenager, that really brought us joy. Maybe it was music, maybe it was being alone. Okay, I'm going to leave you with that for today. I'm going to make sure that you all have access to this resource list and the slide deck. These are some people that are putting out great information about brain development, about wellness, about stress response systems, and how we really manage that. And then, as always, this is my contact information. If you have any questions or comments, you're more than welcome to email me always, stacy@gobu.org. Drop a comment below and let us know, what are you going to be doing for your wellness plan? What is that going to look like? I want to know what you're going to do every day, and then let's just check back in. Take care of you. Glad you spent this time with me today. Thank you.